Uh, Good morning, everybody. I'm just delighted to see you all here today. I'd like to welcome you to the what hopefully will be the inaugural annual Global Geothermal Showcase, but in any case, the first of its kind. I would just like to start out by inviting Rachel Webster up here to say a few words. Welcome, country, and I'll be back. Thank you.
So first of all, let me extend a very warm welcome to everyone here on behalf of the Academy of Science, so both people in the room and online. And I'd particularly like to welcome Marit Brommer and Amanda Lonsdale, who've travelled a very long way to be here in person today. So thank you very much for coming. On behalf of all the presenters and participants today, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners of the land. We acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and connections to land, water and community. We pay our respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal nation, past, present and emerging. Always was and always will be. Now, last Thursday at the Academy of Science meeting, a new report was released that the Academy had been working on for about the last 18 months. It was called Australian Science, Australia's Future, Where Do We Want to Be in 2035? And what the Academy has done over the last 18 months is to develop an evidence-based report to assess Australia's science capability against future needs. Now, of course, this report argued very strongly about training in what we call the fundamental sciences, so mathematics, physics, chemistry, and biology. But it was then set against where the jobs were going to be into the future. And essentially, I think there were half a dozen areas, data-intensive science, and geoscience was one of those areas that was called out explicitly in the report. And, they've pulled a lot of data together and fundamentally have determined that there's a misalignment of skills between current and future needs. And in particular around geoscience, and I'm not saying anything I think that would not be recognised in this room today, but there's a particularly weak pipeline in geoscience, okay? And that the needs will be substantial, and geothermal was explicitly mentioned in that report. And I think by highlighting these needs, the Academy wants to shift the understanding of where Australia's future is and where the future needs will be. So I recommend this report to you. You can find it on the Academy of Science website, but certainly I think it's a report that universities, and in particular, I think it's pitched to our young people, who are coming through the later years of secondary schooling, because this is really when decisions are made about, where they're going to sort of target their future training and their future interests in life. So certainly, I know at the University of Melbourne we'll be taking this very seriously and talking to both, young people and their parents about what we're likely to need in the future. So with those remarks, I will say once again, welcome. The bathrooms are over through the door here, and you can probably find your way quite easily after that. I'm supposed to tell you that there are exits that can get you out of the building. I think they're evident, and I think the people in the room will be smart enough to figure out how to get out of the building if anything should happen. So thank you very much.
When I asked what I was supposed to say as far as if the emergency comes up, what to do, I was told just follow the instructions of the staff here. So just do what you need to do. They'll tell you the right thing. So my name is Mark Ballesteros. I'm the president of the Australian Geothermal Association. As I say, we are delighted to have you here, and I want to also say hello to the many people who have registered online. I think we've got people dialing in from all over the planet, which is quite exciting to see the interest. The reason we're here is basically to generate some interest in geothermal, to raise the profile. Sort of 15 years ago, geothermal in Australia was a big deal. It was a subject of great interest. There was probably 40-odd companies, over 10 listed companies doing active exploration, and there was much hope and excitement around the industry. Things for a number of reasons, many of which had nothing to do with actual technical geothermal concerns, like global downturns in the resource industry, et cetera. As a result, the industry kind of collapsed and went away. But we think it's time to bring it back. There's been some very exciting developments here in the last couple years, and we'd like to share those with you and make sure everybody's aware that I think it's time to be looking again quite seriously at geothermal and see the very wide range of things it can bring to the party. So let's see. Keep waiting for the slide to advance, and I realize I'm supposed to be doing that. Here we go. Okay. I seem to be going in a loop. Thank you, Hugh. Okay, so the AGA is the peak body for Australia's geothermal sector. We provide a forum for individuals and organizations interested in geothermal energy information, discussion, networking, support, and advocacy. So we are affiliated with the International Geothermal Association, and of course, I'm very excited to have Marit Brommer, the CEO of the IGA, here with us today to deliver a keynote shortly. And the AGA was born to promote and encourage the science, technology, and development of geothermal energy in Australia. So you can see our website there, and I'd recommend you to have a look at the information there. Okay, so this event would not be possible without the generous sponsorship of a number of organizations. Firstly, I would like to thank the Academy of Science, and Rachel Webster has helped us organize getting access to this venue, which is, I've never been in the Shine Dome before. It's a spectacular spot. I don't think they build them like this anymore. And we greatly appreciate being able to use this facility. The International Geothermal Association has also generously underwritten Marit's travel to get down here. And I'll just throw in, I believe that was supplemented and supported by a contribution from Sequent. So we'll be seeing more about Sequent shortly, but that's another place they've contributed. I also want to thank specifically Geognostics for their kind support of this event. Geognostics provides good geological consulting services, and Phil Henley is here and would be happy to tell you more about that. And last but not least, the University of Melbourne has a big and active geothermal program advancing research in the subject on a number of different fronts, and they have also generously provided a cash contribution. I also need to recognize the AGA's corporate members. So we've got a growing list here. It's quite exciting to see the screen so full of names. And we could not begin to try to put on an event like this without their support. So I'm just going to briefly run through who they are so everybody's aware, and acknowledge properly that their contributions are appreciated. So Geognostics, as I mentioned, is a provider of geological consulting services globally, based here, and we appreciate not only their support as corporate members, but directly for this event. Solution Energy is a small growing private concern that is a geothermal explorer and technology developer with some permits in Tasmania and New South Wales, but also looking at various activities around the planet these days quite actively. JRG Energy is our long-term supporter, a consulting firm doing geothermal consulting around the planet, offices all over the world. We've got Martin Pujol is down here, and he is also a member of the board on the AGA, and I thank Martin for his help in organizing this event as well. Rockwater is a hydrological consulting firm originally located in Perth, but they've been expanding to do geothermal work not only around Australia, but globally. Strike Energy is an energy explorer, mainly working in the Perth Basin. Greenvale Energy is also an energy-based company doing various different things. They're based in Queensland. North Star, also a Queensland-based company looking at developing various energy solutions, looking at baseload power systems and how geothermal can contribute to that cause. VGEC, Victorian Gas Geothermal Exploration Company, is another geothermal developer explorer, and Mark Elliott is here today. They're based in Brisbane, but are working on a project in Victoria, in the Otway Basin. Sequent, as I mentioned, is a provider of technology for the energy industry in general, but they are very active in the geothermal space, and they've been very supportive of the IGA and the AGA. So we thank them very much. We'll be hearing more from Sequent a bit later. SLB is a huge global energy service provider, and they basically anything you can think of in the energy space, they have a hand in, I think. And we are looking forward to a couple different presentations from them today, and thank you very much for your support, not only monetary, but sending folks down here. We've got Hans and Kifayat, who you'll be hearing from later. Thea Energy is a private Perth-based company that is exploring doing various green energy things. The Jingjura Hub is in the Canning Basin, and they have a geothermal permit in that area as well. So once again, thank you to our corporate sponsors very much. We couldn't do any of this without you. So what I just wanted to do is briefly tell you what we're going to tell you, because this is a very exciting program we've got here. Actually, I need to start out by giving a big shout out to Graham Beardsmore, who is a fellow director of the AGA, also on the IGA board, and is the man who's been the driving force behind getting this event organized. He's organized for Marit Brommer to come down and visit us, and been scrambling madly for months to assemble the very impressive cast of characters that we have to address you today. So well done, Graham, and thanks for your efforts on all this. So there's 3 sessions that we'll be doing today. The first one is kind of a global overview, and at the end of this, you should take away that geothermal energy provides an extensive and varied benefits. It's the development of geothermal energy projects is accelerating around the world, so its time has come. It comes and goes, but I think now it's a good time to be looking at this industry more seriously. And we'd like to explain to you why governments play an essential role in supporting the growth of new geothermal industries. That's probably one of the key messages that we want to convey here. The government of Australia was very supportive of the geothermal industry 15, 20 years ago, and then things didn't quite go to plan, and interest faded, and things have changed enough now that we'd like to raise the profile again. And so that's one of the things that we'd like to get across here, that there have been a lot of significant changes. And the small-scale developments of geothermal that have been persistent in Australia are continuing, and they are things that we can build on. But I think some of the changes that we'll be hearing about, specifically in the technology breakthroughs, hopefully will make it clear that it's time that we can make a step change forward and really increase the potential contribution of geothermal in Australia. And despite these many promising opportunities in the past, there was mainly external factors that stopped the industry in its tracks around 2015. But it's time for it to come back. So to follow that up, the second session after we have morning tea, we'll be looking at opportunities for geothermal energy. You'll be seeing that there's huge amounts of geothermal energy potential in Australia to optimize the energy transition and to use both mature and emerging technologies. And geothermal offers a full spectrum of applications and opportunities, so you can apply geothermal from your homeowner putting in a ground source heat pump system right up to huge power plants, and lots of different things in between. And geothermal energy can be used to complement other technologies and energy sources. It plays well with others. So it's something that is very much a synergy rather than a competing force, in my view. And we're going to offer some strategies on how to meet the challenge of developing and financing a new geothermal energy industry to the point where it can start to sustain itself. Then we'll break for lunch, and we'll come back after lunch, and we'll have a series of talks on the breakthrough developments that have happened in the industry. In short, the technology improvements in subsurface imaging, drilling, production technologies over the past decade really have, as we say, it's a breakthrough in terms of being able to move the dial on not only being able to de-risk some of these opportunities, to visualize them and to make them more commercially viable, which has been an ongoing issue. So the next generation geothermal technologies, which include deep closed-loop geothermal systems that eliminate reservoir risk, which has been one of the ongoing issues about how to effectively deal with that issue. EGS, or enhanced geothermal systems, is now considered commercial technology in the USA, with developments of hundreds of megawatts underway, which to my mind demonstrates that the prior efforts, which many of you here will be aware of, to develop some EGS projects in Australia 10, 15, 20 years ago, were not flawed. They were just ahead of their time. So I think it's time to bring it back and bring out the fruits of those efforts here. Now, these factors all are going to converge and are converging to create huge opportunities in Australia right here and right now. But the sector really needs recognition from the government. We've got industry recognition. We've got applications for permits coming in. But we'd like it to become a more overt part of the energy debate and to get some support that it needs to be considered as one of the opportunities that will fit into the energy transition. So I will just sum that up. Enough arm waving and waffle. Let's get on to the real good stuff. So I would like to introduce Marit Brommer, who I'm very excited to have here in Australia. Marit is the Executive Director of the IGA. It's a role she's held since 2017. She comes with a PhD in Applied Geophysics from the TU Delft in the Netherlands, and an MSc in Geology. Dr. Brommer has 15 years of experience with the oil and gas industry, where she first gained operational experience as a well site geologist and production technologist, which was followed by roles in seismic technology deployment. At the IGA, she's focusing on creating strong partnerships in international operating organizations, partners and industries, engaged in strategic initiatives regarding global policies, sustainability, and industry standards, and focuses on financing geothermal projects as well as public outreach. All of that is a long-winded way to say she is a tireless advocate for geothermal, and I guess we're going to test the tireless part of it. We've got her on a grueling schedule here for the next 3 days, and she'll be zipping back and forth across the country, doing this presentation here, down to Victoria tomorrow for a regional conference, and then over to Perth on Wednesday. So she may just end up being a tired advocate for geothermal, but we thank her for her efforts in advance. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Marit Brommer to the stage. I think this one is going to do it, the next in the back.
Oh, this one?
Yep.
Thank you. First of all, a very good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I flew over Australia quite a few times in my past, let's say, 8 years in this role. But yesterday, or actually the day before yesterday, it was my first touchdown on your beautiful land. So thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to speak within this amazing congress that Graham and of course all the others from the Australian Geothermal Association has put together. Thank you for introducing myself. It's always nice to see who I am and what I am doing. I was asked to give a keynote address, and tireless is a superb word for which I thank you, Mark. I do feel sometimes tired, maybe even a broken record, because I keep on repeating myself, I guess, over the past years in order what needs to get done in order to get geothermal on the front page of our political leadership. And that's let's say, an evolution over the past 8 years. Yes, 2017 was the first time when I stepped into this role. That's now 8 years ago, when I really thought it was just a matter of awareness raising and technological breakthroughs and a bunch of motivated individuals coming together and get the job done. But there is something more important to do, and that is indeed getting governments, getting regulatory bodies, and getting the feel for what geothermal energy in all its aspects and forms can bring to the jurisdiction of choice. So within that, I have decided to call this keynote remarks Aligning the Stars. And the stars is also the wonderful speakers that Graham and the others have put together today, because there will be quite a few of them who will go in depth on technology, on finance, on the reasons why we are so motivated to get geothermal done. So my job is really to set the scene and call for your attention towards a couple of key points that I bet throughout today will be circulating in depth. First and foremost, global energy consumption. On an annual basis worldwide, basically around 3 end-use sectors, still suggest that over 50% of our energy consumption is for heat. We're using energy to heat up and cool down our built environment, our residential areas, our industries, and a lot of other applications that just need heat. Electricity is just 17%, ladies and gentlemen, and when we talk about the energy transition, we're actually just targeting at the moment electricity, which is basically a little bit beyond the purpose, because the purpose of the energy transition is, of course, to target the entire energy consumption space. And if we do not target heat in terms of decarbonization of that effort, we're basically sitting back and letting the oil and gas people win. If you look at renewable heat, in general, worldwide, and the percentage fossil fuels versus renewable heat, not just geothermal, also solar heat and biogas and biomass, renewable heat is just shy of 10%. 90%, 85% is still fossil fuel based. We are not getting any further ahead with the decarbonization of our heating and cooling sector. For power, on the right-hand side, it's year by year, there is additionality. There is an increase, of course, in solar and wind, and they're doing brilliantly, and they're adding the gigawatts online. But if you really look at the percentage of fossil fuels in the entire electricity mix on an annual basis, it is still about 60 to 70% fossil fuel based. So basically we have a long journey ahead, and I am indeed tirelessly advocating for the role of geothermal energy, both for the power space, because we do have a phenomenal role to play within the electrification mantra, but equally important, and one of the most, let's say, hidden subjects of the entire energy dialogue is the tackling of that heat. And hence geothermal, the word suggested, is something that I fundamentally believe have a fundamental role to play within the decarbonization efforts. And that's going to be the keynote address of today's context of all the different conversations you will be seeing and having, and hopefully also during the networking opportunities during the tea and coffee and lunch breaks. Geothermal in numbers. I've learned that in order to shy away from the emotional dialogue, whether you like geothermal, whether you love geothermal, whether you are obsessed with geothermal, it's always good to concentrate on the numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, IGA is International Geothermal Energy Organization, and we have one job, and that is every 3 years we're organizing World Geothermal Congress. Every 3 years, it was in Beijing in 23. In 26, we will be in Calgary in Canada. And in the run-up to those World Geothermal Congresses, we collect data with all our stakeholders and partners. We do a lot of standardization, and we're offering definitions because we believe it or not, even geothermal is quite old. We cannot seem to be converging on certain simple terms and standards and resource classifications and definitions, so there's still a lot of work to do in order to align our internal industry. But geothermal in numbers, 110 countries. In Beijing in 23, we had 88 country reports. In Canada, we will be seeing reports coming from 110 countries. Indeed, Mark, we are growing. We are growing our presence around the world, albeit in certain countries quite small, and maybe it is just one project or 1 kilowatt or 15 kilowatts per time. We are growing. We're seeing growth in terms of our geographical expansion, but definitely we see growth in our numbers. 17 gigawatt electric, it may not be much compared to the average wind farm these days that gets outsourced and implemented. That's in the form of the 5 to 7 gigawatts, I realize that. But for us as geothermal to have installed 17 gigawatt electric, it means a lot for the countries that we are active. To give you an example, in Kenya, 45% of the Kenyans get their electricity from geothermal. El Salvador, 65% of El Salvadorians get their electricity from geothermal. Where we matter a lot. Our numbers are still quite small, I appreciate that, but where we are, we matter. 180 gigawatt thermal, and that is a combination between, and here we go with definitions, shallow geothermal and deep geothermal. And there is also such a thing called ground source heat pumps, which is different than the air-to-air heat pumps. So all these numbers that we are collecting is going to be structured and, let's say, advocated for in the correct category. And that has to do with shallow versus deep geothermal being a completely different approach in terms of regulations, in terms of permitting, in terms of understanding, for instance, the concept of dual licensing. And hence it is super important to have your definitions straight when it's about geothermal energy. For those of you who are more into the climate dialogue, and I'm super happy, not just happy, but to have Amanda with us here as well today, who speaks on climate finance and the importance of understanding your numbers when it comes down to getting the portfolio approach towards, for instance, geothermal energy. Climate change matters when it comes down to the numbers that we represent in it. Now, within geothermal, we align with the UN notion of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them. All 17 are part, of course, on our objective to mitigate for poverty or to gain access to affordable energy. Climate action, number 13, is there, of course, as well. But we are aligning with them. We contribute to the SDGs. Equally important, we contribute to net zero pathways. Because if you look at geothermal emissions, we are 10 times lower than a conventional gas plant. We are 100 times lower than a conventional coal-fired plant. We matter in the amount of megawatts that we put online when it comes down to our CO2 emissions. We are decarbonizing both energy, power and energy, heating and cooling. And last but not least, 90% uptime. Because capacity factor is apparently a difficult word for our ladies and gentlemen in political leadership. But uptime is something that everyone recognizes as something that is up and is running. So 9 out of 10 times, geothermal is on. We're always on. And that is, compared to solar, quite an interesting one, because their uptime, or capacity factor, is around 30%. 25% if you're really lucky in the desert of Oman or Saudi when sand and dust settles in on your solar panels, and let alone the 24 cycle, of course. The wells. The wells are important to us because the wells are the conduit for bringing the electrons to the grid or the heating and cooling in your homes. We have 3,700 productive wells within the electricity space and around 3,100 deep geothermal wells. There are tens of thousands shallow geothermal wells. We can't even calculate them because the reporting code for shallow geothermal wells is not there yet. The International Association for Shallow Geothermal is busy doing that. And part of my keynote address will sit around this observation. And worldwide, on average, if you look at geothermal, and especially the longevity of a geothermal well, this is not oil and gas business that we're in geothermal. This is unlimited source of energy that we have beneath our feet. I like it, Australian Geothermal Association. You put it up there, the heat beneath our feet. This is an unlimited source of energy. This is not depletion. We don't have that within geothermal. And of course, there's management and operations and all that going on. But if you look at geothermal on, for instance, a 30-year lifetime, and mind you, the oldest geothermal power plant is still on since 1914. 111 years old, still going strong. But if you look at 90% uptime, 30 years life cycle, you make money every year. Every year you make money, and it will come into the millions. Such that, if you look at power, for instance, you're somewhere in the range of 30 to 35 million that 1 megawatt well is giving you. This endless source of energy is giving you based on a pricing scheme of 15 cents a kilowatt hour, which is really conservative these days. I would really like to go into a conversation with you guys here in Australia, but after, let's say, certain circumstances in Europe, and we had to wean off some of our domestic gas, the prices skyrocketed in Europe. So 15 cents for power, it would be a dream in 2025 to pay 15 cents. You can easily double that within the German, Netherlands, or France jurisdiction. So with 15 cents a kilowatt hour for 30-year life cycle, 90% uptime, you earn 35 million with 1 megawatt well. The average well in electricity that we're producing sits around 3 to 4 megawatt. So can you imagine the amount of cash that Larderello is still earning since 110 years? For heat is different. There's a little bit more pricing to negotiate with heat because most electricity markets are super regulated. Whether that's for better or for good, I leave it up to the governments to determine. But electricity is a super heavily regulated market. Heating and cooling, most of the time is not. It's either a price point taken from the natural gas, because that's benchmarks commodity-wise, volatility-wise across the world, or it's a local contract that you set. And hence what you see in most cases, this is an average obviously, within the heating and cooling market, you see there's more money to be made with heating and cooling wells. So a 1 megawatt well would almost leave you with over 50 million euros. Our operational expenditure, super low. This is what all your operators will tell you. Yes, there is management and there is infrastructure and you need to maintain the wells. But overall, on the lifetime, our OPEX, super low. The problem sits, of course, in our CAPEX, and that is something that we will talk about in a bit. The country that is leading at the moment is not the US when it comes down to heating and cooling. It is actually China. We will hear some phenomenal stories about new technology and innovation, and I commend, of course, the phenomenal entrepreneurial spirit and the commercialization of some of these pioneering technologies that come out of the US. But if I look at it from a number point of view, China is the number one when it comes down to utilizing the infrastructure of geothermal towards heating and cooling cities, industries, airports, train terminals, you name it, they do it. And why? Not because they thought it was nice to do, they thought it was smart to do. And there was a secondary reason. And I think that is the most important theme to talk about today as well, and that is to have motivation. So the motivation of the Chinese government was to get out of coal because the health costs for citizens to breathe, let's say, not so clean air, skyrocketing. And all these, let's say, inner cities within Chinese bigger cities, which start somewhere with 10, 50 million citizens per city, it was coal-based. And hence the approach towards drilling over 1,000 wells within the past 8 years, 10 years, on a super fast basis, is of course helped by having a solid workforce, having an oil and gas industry active, mapping your geoscientific, let's say, approach as well towards the subsurface. But ultimately, it started with the motivation to get out of coal, invest in infrastructure, and get the job done. The average wells that the geothermal sector worldwide is drilling is grown until 400. So when I joined in 2017, we drilled on average around 200, 250 wells per year. And we have really upped that to 400 wells. Now, Mark, you sort of suggested that I have a track record in oil and gas. Thank you for always mentioning that. So I'm still brushing off my black years. But the average number for drilling, and we have diagnostics here as well, of drilling wells in the oil and gas industry sits in the hundreds of thousands. 100,000 wells each year is drilled by the oil and gas industry. We are minute. We are dwarfs compared to our friends in the subsurface industry coming from oil and gas. In order to secure our pledges, triple up is one of the pledges that many governments, including your Australian government, has done in the Convention of the Parties, the COP. Triple up energy, in order to comply with the 1.50 pathway, in order to comply with the decarbonization, the minimum amount of wells that we need to drill in geothermal energy sits in the order of 20,000 wells, which is, of course, a phenomenal step change. That's not even one magnitude change. This is like 3 or 4 magnitude changes that the geothermal industry has to do. Rachel, I take your point very seriously about the workforce and the inspiration that we all need to do in order to get people in geoscience, but ultimately also weaning them off of oil and gas interest and getting them into geothermal, because we need them. We need a workforce. We need the skilled people to do the subsurface modeling. We need to have the rigs ready to drill. We need to have the people who can build the infrastructure around it and understand how to manage these 20,000 wells that are going to be drilled. Because that's the prospect for geothermal in the coming decade. So in 2035, when I'm probably retired and not standing here to do an opening remark, but really what I hope to see within 10 years is that we have reached this number and that we are indeed contributing in a significant way towards the reduction of CO2 emissions through geothermal energy, both for power and obviously for heating and cooling. When you hear all this, and especially when you have someone who is so excited and motivated, and you have all these success stories, and you have the numbers that tell you that we're going to make a lot of money out of heat beneath our feet, you always wonder, why is it not happening yet? And why is it standing still in certain countries? Now you, of course, here in Australia have certain observations about 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And I agree with you, Mark, that's the past. You need to get over that and look outside. And this is why Graham and all your fellow directors have probably organized this today. But ultimately, there are a few showstoppers within geothermal that I think is important to mention. And I bet that the rest of the speakers today will individually touch upon these topics as well in order to overcome what we call the cliff. And that is, if you look at our reward, everyone loves it. Once you have drilled the well, there's not an operator who will not go in or an investor who will not say, I would like to join. The problem in geothermal is the road towards the first spudding of the well. And that is taking, on average, 7-8 years. It's taking a lot of capital. It's taking a lot of political goodwill. It's taking a regulatory reform in certain places. And it takes time. And it takes people to understand what the value is. And what you see is that the ones who do not really appreciate all that risk, because people just like to talk about risk and mitigate risk, they get stuck in the cliff, and they just see the cliff, and they don't see this huge reward that comes out of just one or multiple wells. And hence, it is about aligning the stars, right? It is about understanding that you need to have the right policy in place, with the right regulatory framework, with the right motivation, and with the right technology to do exactly what it is that you want to do in that specific project. And hence, price point is super critical, but it's not the only thing. It's not just about the costs. It is also about the understanding in what type of market you sit. So, based on our analysis, so this is IGA over the past, let's say, 30 years, working with all our stakeholders, doing every 3 years World Geothermal Congresses, and getting to a point where you can sort of analyze what the biggest stoppers are. And the biggest stoppers are, beside, of course, the fact that you need to have a permit to drill, because you need to have a permit to drill. There are many more aspects to this that sort of stops a project in its feet. And there are a couple of things that I would like to iterate here, and I really hope that during this day, but also maybe following up conversations in the coming period, coming months, Graham said maybe next year you come back with a very good proposal for how to get the job done. Because there are a couple of things that we can talk about and mitigate quite easily, as long as we're all understanding what it is that we talk about. First of all, it's about the market. Do you have a market? So hence, understanding what stage your market is in. Is it early stage? Is it an emerging market? Is it a mature market? Now, here in Australia, I guess we are still in an emerging market. In an emerging market, there is no real commerciality. There's no real commercial project yet. Everyone is looking at each other and thinking, when is the first happening? Because then I can learn from that and do it over and over and over again. Hence, you have an issue. Because no one wants to be a first mover unless there is strong political support. If your minister, Mr. Bowen, comes here and says, yes, I want to have COP31 in Adelaide, and I want to have geothermal done, I bet everyone would step in line and do it. But Mr. Chris Bowen is probably not saying that yet. But maybe at COP31, when he gets his wishes, you get the job done. A key barrier in an emerging market is exploration. And hence, what I see a lot happening with countries that overcome this barrier is they think of a way to incentivize that risk through maybe some public funding, data transparency. There is maybe an idea of sharing geological data, or there is an incentive maybe to a policy to fund exploration, or to have a drilling mitigation measure in place, or to think of a way to ensure the risk of that first well. So those are all kind of measures how an emerging market can overcome that sort of first cliff risk. In an emerging market where there are some projects already, so basically you see projects but it's still very slow, it's actually all about Amanda's role. We need finance, and we need to have very clear PPAs, so power purchase agreements. It needs to have strong policy support because there will always be still policy uncertainty within, let's say, the emerging market with some slow growth. But it's also about taxation. Because there's one other aspect, I guess, within our wells, is that the rewarding bit is long. And there is a bit of course, lead time before you get your money back. And hence the understanding that there is patience needed. And there is a bit of a need to understand that there is a construction for loans, and hence the pension funds come in the majority of the cases in Europe, where you see that district heating infrastructure is being built, the pension funds are behind it, because they have windows that goes over, let's say, I want my cash back within 3 years. Because ultimately, somewhere between 7 and 9 years after spudding and after drilling, you get your money back. And that's not for every type of investor correctly. Anyway, Amanda will tell you all about that. Feed-in tariffs, tax incentives, but also taxation of the way you regulate your reward. When and how your money comes back to both state and private developer is a way to regulate, of course, the upsides of geothermal. And there are all kinds of clever mechanisms how you do that. In a mature market, it's actually all about understanding your grid or your heating network, and it's about saturation and finding the right type of clients beyond, of course, your first project. Pricing instability, in most cases, gas is the dominant benchmark for heating and cooling, and electricity is super regulated. We have to fit in as geothermal, and if you don't, you need a government who either feeds in or helps to sustain longevity in the profile of taxation and remuneration. So flexible pricing mechanisms, how you integrate in the market, keeping geothermal as a priority on SDG thinking, on climate finance thinking, on ESG thinking. That's the lobby that geothermal still needs to do more heavily when it comes down to getting geothermal on a mature market base. So one well may not maybe deliver on the national commitments, I appreciate that. But ultimately, geothermal as a whole is doing that quite effectively and quite efficiently, both through power and through heating and cooling. We are delivering on the NDC targets. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this, these are the national determined contributions. Your beautiful country here is part of that negotiation and has clear NDCs how it wants to get out of CO2 emissions and reduce that at least in the foreseeable 5 to 10 years, at least before 2050. But also climate action and hence affordable and clean energy under the UN protocol for the Paris Agreement and getting out of fossil fuel and into a new energy economy is all part of the SDG financing metrics, but also is part of geothermal's lobby around getting us a priority on government agendas. And for maintaining, and hopefully still we're doing that in terms of the 1.5 pathway, geothermal is excellently suited, especially when it comes down to that heating and cooling element. That it's not always easy, I get that, but it's the high-level hook that I would urge also the association in terms of lobbying your governments, and whether that is state or national, that of course is very dependent on where your biggest levers sit. But definitely these hooks are needed in order to get geothermal as a priority. These days, there's a lot of talk about AI, and we will hear this today as well, with certain companies making phenomenal progress with setting specific PPAs, power purchase agreements, with the Googles and the Metas and all this procurement. The green procurement coming from AI is phenomenal. It will drive growth, and I bet Australia is ready to do some of that as well. And there is also within the IGA and Google, we have some phenomenal conversations on protocols on securing green growth through purchasing and procuring geothermal, because we are earmarked as one of the only, actually the only one, baseload 24/7 available energy source. So the world is moving towards a policy directive. I appreciate there is all kinds of uncertainty right now. I appreciate that, but if you really look carefully along the lines of the policy dialogues in climate space, it's all about decarbonization, and it's all about procuring clean, firm power and heating and cooling, and that's where geothermal really wins. Ultimately, what I see a lot within consumers, and not just the individual household, but more like the industry, especially the industry that is in demand of heat, let's say in the range of 60 to 100, 120 degrees, they need stability in pricing. Because let's be fair, gas price is not stable. It's volatile and it's killing businesses. And hence geothermal offers a phenomenal baseline energy cost towards a bottom line that people can calculate and forecast for a longer period of time than just being dependent on volatility. And of course, the circular value of geothermal is phenomenal. We create jobs. We create per megawatt 10 to 12 jobs. That is both for power, but also for heating and cooling. And they go beyond just the geologist who is doing the subsurface. It's about all kinds of jobs that we create within the food industry, within the wellness industry. And hence we're serving an agenda that goes beyond the social agenda. I hear a lot that we have so much potential. And I think that's absolutely true. You will hear today as well that there is a map about Australia with the potential of geothermal, and that is all phenomenal. And I will tirelessly preach about the potential of geothermal, but ultimately it is not about the potential. It's about turning that into action, and hence turning that into megawatts that I can map every 3 years in my World Geothermal Congress when we stand up and speak. And it's the wells that deliver that. So the wells are the ones who are driving that change, and policy is the wellhead. Without policy, there will be no wells, and there will be just potential. I thank you very much for your time.
Do you want to linger a second? Thanks for that. Are there any questions for Marit? We've got just a couple minutes here. And see if there's any coming in from online. If not, there's going to be opportunities for discussion and networking later. So, okay. Oh, yes, Mark? Could you please speak into a microphone, because otherwise the folks online won't be able to hear anything.
Thanks, Marit, for a wonderful presentation. It's just a shame we haven't got more politicians in the audience. But I'm wondering where you really see we can get this funding. Is it from big tech, who we know are circling Australia? But we really need it from the politicians, from the government, to restart geothermal in Australia. They had a go to start with, as industry did, and we failed. But this time, we have a real chance of winning. But we've got to get them on board ASAP. Are you talking to any of the politicians in this trip? Or can you?
Well, I think, first of all, what I 100% agree. It's the government that needs to unlock a budget, whatever that budget is, whether we're talking the billions or the millions, but they need to unlock the first capital in order to de-risk. That's what they need to do. And whether that's in the form of a drilling accelerator or an exploration fund or in whatever shape and form that needs to be, let's say, motivated enough by a governor or a energy minister, in such a form it needs to happen. Because otherwise the procurers of big tech will not come either. Because the procurers of big tech will come when there is stability in pricing, in political will, in motivation behind why they're coming. So am I speaking to them? Well, Graham, are you taking me to all your ministers? I think this time around not so much. I think this is, let's say, the reason why it is probably in Australia still a little bit hesitant, because there is no real commitment yet from the government. I think this is the reason why AGA, as in the Australian Geothermal Association, under your leadership, is probably getting the traction again on board, and to see that there are many of you who are not only just interested because they're interested in geothermal, they really want to get the job done. And I think that's when politicians will probably wake up. But it's a long journey before you have Minister Bowen sign off on, let's say, a 10 million drilling accelerator fund in the coming year. You need to act now, because otherwise you pass a year, right, before your budgets are going to be set. And I think, second, I mean, I see this a lot in other countries as well, it takes someone to do it. It takes a demonstration project. It takes a pilot. It takes, Rachel, we were discussing this as well over tea or coffee this morning. You need to have a showcase. And hence the collective target out of your Global Geothermal Showcase could be, we want to have a demonstration project with a target of within a year or within 2 years. We want to see so many people active around it, or for this specific industry cluster, or for this specific basin. And I think the clearer you are in terms of getting one project over the footlight, it will be enormously helpful to follow. Thank you.
Yes, we can have one quick one. We need to keep.
Hello, yes. Thanks, Marit. My name is Effie. I'm from the Australian government, the Net Zero Economy Authority. I think you're right that government has a big role to play, but in Australia, government is also quite risk averse. So they do tend to want some evidence that industry is interested. But I also get the point that domestic industry may not be aware of the geothermal potential and the commercial business case. My question, though, is do you think there is an opportunity for international players who have seen how geothermal can be commercially viable to invest in Australia? And if so, have you seen examples elsewhere where an international player has gone to a country and been the first player to kick off that pilot project?
It's a very, very interesting question, and it always is a combination of both, because not every specialty sits within your country, and hence there will always be a combination between international players who have done the trick before to come into the country of interest and start helping, consulting, advising, or building. risk averse is, I think you're not the only government that is risk averse. I mean, the majority of us humans are risk averse. But I think within the Geothermal Showcase, you will hear this today as well, and I hope that that's another key takeaway message from the technical expertise and also the, let's say, the drillers that will be presenting their cases and the showcases of success coming from commerciality will probably speak to the point of that actually we're not that risky anymore. And hence, I think the most important thing that I would advise maybe to you as well within your, your stakeholders around you within the government is to make geothermal look like a beautiful reward that just needs to overcome a specific piece of risk. Because overall, it's not risky. It's layering this risk such and structuring the risk such that actually it looks like a gradual progress. And I think today you will probably hear that, and I think that will be an important educational piece towards people in charge of making change happen within government. And the second point is, I think as an industry, I think we should do much better, and I take this upon all of us here as well, is to report on that risk and how we've overcome that risk, because it will help emerging and early stage markets to assess that risk and to see that actually it is not that risky. You just need to mitigate it in a few standardized ways. And that's a reporting thing that unfortunately within the, the 30 years or the 50 years of existence within geothermal, it is still a little bit too fragmented and unstructured that I get sometimes the feeling that projects are prototypes. Right? There is no real standardization yet around how do you deal with geothermal in country A, B, C, or project A, B, C, etc., etc. And hence I take that upon ourselves as well as a community, that if we get that across the footlights better, in a standardized, structured way, it will help you as well to do your job at home as well. Thank you. A great question. Thank you, Mark. I think now I need to...
Okay, I'll leave it there. Can continue those conversations at the networking session here. But that's a very good lead in, I think, to our next speaker. Which is not Rosalind Archer, I don't think, unless she's the one. Oh, sorry. There we go. Our next speaker is a virtual presentation. So it's Rebecca Schulz, who's with the International Energy Agency, and I think may help address some of these issues that Marit has flagged. So Rebecca is a senior analyst and lead for the next generation geothermal technologies and oil and gas transfer for the IEA's Future of Geothermal report at the International Energy Agency. She also serves as the lead analyst on oil supply for the oil markets team. And prior to her tenure at the IEA, she held a distinguished career spanning more than 2 decades at Shell, where she delivered multi-billion-dollar unconventional and deepwater projects worldwide. Her final role at Shell was as the head of the U.S. Energy Transition Program. And I'm very pleased to have Rachel joining us today from her home in France at probably a very uncivilized early hour. Thank you for being up and about, and I'll just turn it over to you. And thanks, Rachel. Rebecca, I'm sorry.
Yes,
sorry.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you to the Australian Geothermal Association, the International Geothermal Association, and Marit, and the Australian Academy of Sciences for the opportunity to speak with you all today. It's my honor to be able to pick up the baton and take this next section of your morning forward. I'm going to start perhaps with a bit of the history of the IEA very briefly, and then I'm going to step us into our most recent report on geothermal. The history of the IEA, the International Energy Agency, dates back to the 1973-1974 oil crisis. And its core function then, or now as then, is really centered around energy security. But since the IEA's inception, the definition around energy security has since expanded across all forms of energy and their supply chains and their people and the policies needed to sustainably develop them. And in particular, geothermal resources is starting to really take a hold. Marit was earlier describing, the resource potential around that. So we're going to take a few steps forward from that potential and how we think some of that potential can really start moving into action and into investments moving forward. And so today, it's my honor to be able to step you through an overview of our Future of Geothermal Energy report that was released in December of 2024. And this report was completed and the work performed on request by Hungary when it served as the presidency of the Council of the EU, and specifically requested to examine how the oil and gas industry could advance geothermal investments and geothermal development. And so I do apologize with the room today in case some of this sort of background information has been covered, but I wanted to make sure that we were setting the scene, and it was widely known in terms of the IEA's view of where we're sitting today, and then where we think we can go to tomorrow and into the future to 2050 and beyond. And so today we see geothermal as primarily consumed in the form of heat, and with geothermal heat pumps and district heating representing 2/3 of final consumption. The difference, though, within that is how countries have opted to exploit geothermal resources, with China in particular accounting for the vast majority of its use and in the form of heat. But so far, in total, we see that geothermal energy meets less than 1% of energy demand today. And I'm just going to step through in terms of the definitions that we had used in our areas of focus for the Future of Geothermal Energy report. And so while geothermal energy is incredibly versatile and it has an ever-expanding array of uses, for our purposes, the IEA Future of Geothermal Energy report focused on heat and power production. And within that, we looked at conventional hydrothermal, enhanced geothermal systems, as we're familiar, conventional hydrothermal as we're familiar with in places, of course, like Iceland and New Zealand, enhanced geothermal systems that involve fracking the subsurface and transferring heat with working fluids, and also closed loop geothermal, which comes under an array of different names as well. And the last two that fall under the umbrella of what we call next generation geothermal. And we feel that technology innovation today can truly unlock this potential and really turn it into investments and development. And stepping ahead, and this is perhaps a bit of a precursor to what you're going to see from Project Innerspace as well. And so a huge thank you to Project Innerspace for supporting the resource assessments of the work that we're going to show over the next few slides. And we start with the geothermal potential and the energy potential first at 2 kilometers. We start to pop out where we see some of the conventional hydrothermal potential today. And stepping ahead to 4 kilometers depth from subsurface. And here we really are focusing on onshore resources in the picture that we're showing. And at 4 kilometers depth, we're showing where geothermal potential starts to pop out, and also that overlap of what's generally considered quite an accessible depth with respect to oil and gas development. But in stepping forward to 7 kilometers, you start to see that geothermal potential really is everywhere. But there is that technology gap, the skills gap, the technology gap, the materials gap to really be able to consistently move from, say, a 4 kilometer depth to a 7 kilometer depth. And when we look at this depth and how that transitions and translates into potential, and with solar PV on the right-hand side with over 2,200 terawatts, geothermal starts to pop up at around 3 to 5 kilometers of depth. But it's not until we really stretch into 5 to 7 kilometers that we start to see the true potential of geothermal start to grow, and that resource base start to expand globally. So for next generation geothermal, we see the technical potential can be 60 times more than today's total installed power capacity worldwide. It's huge, and it's second only after solar PV. And this full potential could meet, if we met it all, could meet 140 times global electricity demand today. But the question is, how do we, as Marit had framed up, how do we turn this potential not just into to a series of words, but how do we actually truly turn it into action? And there's a huge and significant overlap of competencies between geothermal and oil and gas. When we look across both conventional, EGS, and closed loop, everything from the evaluation, planning, and management systems to drilling and completions, surface facilities, and other. And so when we look across this, and this was done in conjunction with the Society of Petroleum Engineers, we see that every dollar invested in geothermal can between about 65 to 80% of that dollar has significant overlap with the skills and expertise of the oil and gas industry. And in that industry, starting particularly in North America, in Texas, where I've worked, expanding across the US and in Canada, the unconventional shale revolution has really transitioned and transformed the petroleum industry. And increasingly, as many and all of us, I think, are aware in the audience, we're seeing that transition start to really creep into geothermal. So how do we actually develop this workforce, and how do we transition the technologies and the skills into geothermal? And what would that mean? What would that do for us from a cost perspective? And here we're showing that estimate from the US Annual Technology Baseline for enhanced geothermal systems. So from 2023, what were reported as the average cost for EGS. And with, let's say, a low degree of learnings transfer from oil and gas industry, we can start to see around 15% of that start to transition and lower the cost of EGS. But the full potential, if we really start to look at, not just what can we do and pick up today, but really how do we take that standardization, as Marit was saying, how do we take that standardization and start to turn it into economies of scale? How do we really take some of the spillover technologies and apply them over to geothermal? And then also, how do we really develop the research and take that from a benchtop and really be able to lift it and carry it into early demonstration projects? And with that, with a high level of knowledge transfer and the productivity gains from the oil and gas industry, we see that we could reduce next generation geothermal costs by 3/4, around 75 to 80%. And this is significant because this really starts to drive down the levelized cost of electricity for geothermal. And with action today to help take those learnings across, we see that the geothermal LCOE could actually decrease in line with the solar PV utility as was seen in the last decade between 2013 and 2023. So with that dramatic cutting of costs and putting that into perspective, we see and estimate that actually both conventional and next generation geothermal can become highly competitive across dispatchable low emission technologies. And as we were listening, and Marit was highlighting earlier, geothermal is really the 24/7 low emission technology available. And the ability to drive down those costs, to transfer learnings across, and to be able to look at that potential is something that we really cannot underestimate. These rapid cost reductions could unlock over 800 gigawatts of next generation geothermal potential by 2050. And so the largest markets that we see, looking back to the resource mapping, we see in the United States, China, India, Southeast Asia, and Europe. And reflecting back to trips and presentations and discussions that I had in the US, but also across Europe more recently, geothermal was remarked as the only energy that all sides of the political divide could agree on. And so I'm hoping after today that we can also hope to carry some of that across to Australia as well. And so if we're able to make these high levels of learning transfer, the market opportunity for geothermal starts to expand extremely rapidly. And we see by 2035 that up to $1.25 trillion could be invested in geothermal if we start to put together a series of activities. And I'll start to share some of those recommendations on the next slide. So geothermal we see could meet up to 15% of global electricity growth to 2050. Plus, in addition, provide heating and cooling in industry and buildings. But the question is, how do we really start to get there? And that's where, as Marit was highlighting, we've struggled in the past. We held a workshop for geothermal in October of 2024. And the resounding feedback from the people attending the workshop was to have countries include geothermal in their energy agendas, have countries set targets for geothermal exploration and deployment. As of right now, there are more than 100 countries that have policies in place for solar PV, and there are only 30 countries at the time that we had reported out in December, that had policies in place for geothermal. Data and local resource assessment. There are very few countries, of the 30 countries that have, let's say, geothermal geothermal policies in place, there are only a small fraction of those that actually have, and some of those are by the state level, that actually have data collection standards in place and make those publicly available to really help understand the in-country potential. And the reason to do that is to put that information into the hands of entrepreneurs that can be able to pick up and understand and take forward the exploration and start to close the exploration gap, and especially be able to move forward through some of those earlier stages. But to be able to move forward in the early stages, we need to have regulatory and permitting in place. In most countries around the world, there is not sufficient geothermal policies in place to really be able to permit. In some cases, I think the average, as Marit was highlighting, is between 6 and 8 years to get a geothermal permit forward. In some cases, it's up to 20 years. And if we would like to be able to move geothermal forward, we need to be sharing best practices with respect to permitting, and we need to be sharing best practices with respect to community involvement in order to be able to take our next steps. Financial incentives and safeguards. And these are the different instruments, as I think you're also going to be hearing more about today, to both encourage demand, but also implement risk sharing and provide long-term revenues. And so these are instruments like contracts for difference, like power PPAs, and other elements to take forward. The AI explosion that's happened over the last few years has really helped to center and provide a demand source that hasn't existed in the past. And the 24/7 baseload flexible capability of geothermal helps to serve a very specific niche that encourages that demand as well. And so in the US, where PPAs for geothermal, when new entrepreneurs were going and asking, was around in US numbers here, 3 cents per kilowatt hour, they're now getting 3 to 4 times that in PPAs. And that is really starting to pull more people and more companies into the geothermal drive. Geothermal heating, cooling, and deployment. As you're going to see from Project Interspace later, we need to perform local heat mapping based on the additional data collections that we have, and also help to support the infrastructure investment and planning. The heating and cooling elements of geothermal, what we see in some cases, like in China, are very much being taken up upon. The cooling ability for geothermal has really not come to the forefront of most policymakers. And perhaps most importantly in all of this is the innovation and human capital. We're coming off of a time where there's a significant workforce from the oil and gas industry that has been working for a series of decades, much fewer that are starting to come into the industry today than there has been in the past. And to be able to pull and utilize those skills and apply them to geothermal, there's a relatively limited time frame unless we start building in a path forward to take these skills and be able to move them across into geothermal, but adapt them to geothermal's needs and how geothermal differentiates from oil and gas. And finally, international cooperation around global standards. If we really want to get to the scalability and be able to move people and resources and equipment around the world, we need to have global standards. If we want to be able to take data and be able to translate that data across, we need to be able to understand this. And one of the areas that I think the International Energy Agency can specifically provide is a space and an ability to both cooperate, but also come together and collaborate around some of these issues, specifically in permitting, in data capture, and in financing incentives and safeguards and best practices. And so with that, thank you very much for your time this morning, and happy to take any questions. Thanks, Mark.
My goodness, thank you, Rebecca. That was stirring and inspirational. I appreciate that perspective on a global front. Have we got any questions for Rebecca? Yes, coming.
Jenny Hayward, CSIRO. I'd just like to ask about the capital cost. So you had the figure showing how the cost can reduce with learnings. I just wondered, is the initial cost for a first of a kind plant, or is that for, say, nth of a kind?
Perhaps I can go back to that as well, and we can just take a look together. It was this one you were referring to, Jenny? Okay. First of all, Jenny, thank you very much for the question. So the number that's reflected here is the, sorry, go ahead, I see you have the microphone again. The number that's reflected, oh, sorry, please, go ahead.
No, go on.
Thank you. That's reflected here is the average of the annual technology baseline that's put out from the US Department of Energy. And so it's reflected of the EGS systems that have reported out that they've been able to get estimates on. There's also, as we look to and talk to several participants, there's a huge range within EGS costs today. And so it's a little bit misleading to take this as a firm figure for EGS costs. So when we talk to companies like Fervo, and you also already look at the work from Utah Forge and the ability of that demonstration project to show how much they've been able to reduce time and costs, I think we can already say that a lot of this learnings transfer is starting to happen. But to really be able to drive this learning transfer and to really be able to take it down to that, 75%, 80% learnings, there needs to be the level of standardization for geothermal to help reach those economies of scale. We need to be able to access a resource that has a repeatable producibility. So one of the gaps with conventional hydrothermal is it is not very repeatable. And so that has been a challenge with respect to much of the exploration side of geothermal and the perception around that. But if we are able to move into hot sedimentary basins, then we may be able to very well have a much more repeatable exploration plan and also a much more repeatable development and production coming out of sedimentary basins. And so there are a number of things. So just maybe the short answer is annual technology baseline. The longer answer is there's a wide range. And I guess the final piece of that is there's a lot of this already happening today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Anybody else with a question here? Okay, we might, I'm sorry that we can't include you in our networking discussions later, Rebecca. It would be lovely to carry on the conversation. But thank you very much for joining us in your time. And
Thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Let's just carry on here. All right. I'm not getting a response here, Hugh. Okay. No, that's too far. Here we go. The last speaker for this session, last but certainly not least, is Rosalind Archer. Rosalind is the Dean of Academic of Sciences at Griffith University in Queensland. And prior to joining Griffith, she was a member of the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Auckland and served as director of the Geothermal Institute from 2013 to 21, and also served as the deputy dean. Rosalind has been serving on the board of the NZ Geothermal Association and is currently on the board of the Australian Geothermal Association, and we are certainly happy to have her there. She's a distinguished member of the Society of Petroleum Engineers and a fellow of the Engineering New Zealand, and Rosalind holds a PhD in petroleum engineering from Stanford, supervised by Roland Horn, whom we'll be hearing from a little bit later. So without further ado, over to you, Rosalind.
Great, thank you very much.
Slides advance here.
Great. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. It does highlight that I've crossed over from the dark side of oil and gas, and it was really interesting to hear other speakers referring to that as a theme and the importance of that, both in terms of technology and in terms of workforce. So, as introduced, I am a Kiwi and have learned about geothermal in this wonderful geothermal wonderland of Aotearoa, New Zealand, with its hydrothermal systems, with this obvious active kind of surface expression of geothermal. Whereas Australia does not, on the surface, really look like a country that should have geothermal. It has no active volcanism. It does have some hot springs. But it is a very different geology than the geologies that are further advanced in their geothermal journey. So this map, though, points out that Australia does have heat at depth. So this is at 5 kilometres deep, and that depth part is an important part of the equation in terms of next generation geothermal everywhere. It also has blanketing sediments that allow some of that heat to accumulate. So that, to me, even though it doesn't look like volcanoes, boiling mud, geysers and hot springs, that map to me says Australia has geothermal potential. Australia does have some geothermal history, and some of that history is things that many of you will be aware of, but I will recap that history because we have a diverse international audience. So, first of all, Australia had an ORC plant out in the outback in a town called Birdsville, small outback town, that was successfully using an ORC to generate electricity by tapping just 1,280 metres into what's called the Great Artesian Basin. That plant operated successfully for 25 years. Then its technology came due for a refresh, and they went in a different direction and now power that community by solar. But they had a very happy relationship with geothermal. There's also another ORC plant that gets a little bit of publicity that was completed in a community called Winton. So Winton's highlighted in red on the map there. Again, small outback community. Small plant, 310 kilowatts. It did encounter some technical issues during commissioning, among other things, and ultimately didn't become operational long term. It was, though, pushing the bounds. They were trying to operate that plant using 86-degree bore water, which is probably doing things the hard way. But they were really keen to try. Many of you will have also heard of habanero. So I'm not referring to chili peppers for anyone who's American. Habanero drilled wells to over 4,000 metres into hot granitic rock in, again, remote regional Queensland, inland Queensland. They successfully had their pilot plant running with fluid at 215 degrees C, powering a megawatt plant for 160 days in 2013. But then comes the interplay, among other things, of markets, of grid connectivity, of partnerships. So they had a farm-in partner that was going to use some of the fluid coming off the project for process heat to help clean up their use of natural gas processing. That partner withdrew. So in the end, even while technically one could argue habanero was a success, it demonstrated flow, it demonstrated temperature, it generated electricity, it wasn't something that was a long-term success. The next big project in Australia's geothermal journey was Paralana. Again, drilling to about 4,000 metres, drilling in a way that had EGS-style stimulation. There's a lot of data out on their stimulation work, generated lots of microseismic events, lots of analysis of those microseismic events that showed that stimulation really did open up permeability at Paralana. Clearly a really important part of the geoscience you need for a geothermal project to work. They had temperature, they had a high geothermal gradient, 600 kilometres north of Adelaide, so it's a significant distance, but ultimately not the middle of the nowhere, so to speak. Again, they had significant funding, both from private investors and from government in partnership, but ultimately the funding didn't quite connect in terms of what they needed and the timelines they needed it on, so it didn't progress to a pilot plant. But people did learn a lot about Australia's geothermal potential from the Paralana project. I also want to emphasise the importance of direct use. So there was discussion in the previous presentation on the importance of geothermal for heating and cooling, the potential that has. So Australian Geothermal Association census, which was shared at one of the WGCs, talked about 36 megawatts thermal of installed capacity in the country as at January 23, and that number's only going to have tracked up. And that was a 9% increase since the previous update. So direct use is happening in Australia, and it happens at a range of scales and at a range of temperatures. Everything from aquaculture, from farming barramundi, very popular fish species, which only needs 29-degree water, through to ground source heat pumps in a range of buildings, including the Geoscience Australia building here in Canberra, as well as spas and bathing examples. Always the most wonderful forms of geothermal fieldwork when you get to visit those. So there are bathing examples in multiple states in Australia. And in particular, I might just note the Queensland one, the Tullaroo Springs one. That's owned by a corporation of Indigenous peoples, because I think if Australia is going to progress their geothermal journey forwards, we have to think about how Indigenous people are going to be part of that. Obviously, that's a theme coming from New Zealand that is dear to my heart, because that's a very important part of geothermal in New Zealand. We are actually very close to one of the big direct use systems in the country at a redevelopment of the Australian War Memorial here in Canberra. You could walk there. It has the largest geothermal heat exchange system in this country, potentially one of the largest systems in the world, 120 kilometres of pipe used to run the system. They believe they're saving over $1 million per year. That's not to be sneezed at. Really important part of making that centre operate on green power in very real ways. So, where are we now? This map is a recently released map from the Australian Geothermal Association showing a 700% increase in geothermal tenements between 2024 and 2021. Actually, the map includes tenements out to 25. So that increase is fascinating. There is clearly something going on around companies taking the first steps in terms of securing geothermal acreage. I find the cluster of tenements in the top of the country in the Northern Territory quite fascinating. They have been quietly taken up largely by a company called HydroXgen. So there's a question about international players. Fairly difficult to find much about what they're doing, but it appears that they are looking at the sort of export opportunity through to Asia, potentially via hydrogen. You've got other tenements in zones that were traditionally thought of as oil and gas territory. You've got tenements in every state in the country. So there is real and genuine interest in geothermal in this country. Now, getting a little bit geoscientific, I am an engineer but hang out with a lot of geologists and geophysicists. One thing that's important to think about in terms of development in this country, especially with some of the next generation geothermal technologies that often require stimulation, is making sure we understand what's called the stress regime underground. For example, you will have heard of the Fervo technology that stimulates wells, typically horizontal wells, where you're relying on fractures that propagate up vertically. Fractures are only going to be willing to propagate up vertically if the stress regime favours that. Now, that's typically in what's called a normal faulting environment to a strike-slip environment. Here on the map, we've got a map at depth. So this is down at 4 kilometres depth. And the sort of the red and yellow patches are highlighting where the stress regime is particularly good for those sort of stimulation-based technologies. And those zones typically align quite well with some other places there is already heat, or some of the places where there's oil and gas activity. So you've got workforce technology all in the right places. Linking up to oil and gas, I've also included a map here of Australia's sedimentary basins. So the parts of the country here coloured in the sort of yellow, orange to green are where there is significant sedimentary basins. Those sedimentary basins, for instance, through Queensland, the Cooper Basin, Eromanga, Amadeus, are producing a lot of oil and gas. And that oil and gas industry is producing up to a megalitre per day of fluid just from the Cooper Basin. Hot water coming up. And that hot water is treated as a disposal issue. It's treated as a problem, not as a resource. So I think one of the plays that Australia still has room to explore is shifting the mindset from an oil and gas industry that is typically in decline and looking at the energy content of the water that are co-producing with hydrogens as a geothermal resource and as something that can be harnessed. There are also hot sedimentary aquifers in Australia. So they're permeable, they're water-bearing, they've got heat, they've got all the ingredients. So there are players looking at hot sedimentary aquifer projects in Australia. Those projects then don't need any form of stimulation. So on the sort of stimulation question, there is a social licence theme that stimulating geothermal wells could sound to the public like hydraulically fracturing oil and gas wells, which can elicit a bit of an allergic reaction from the public in many parts of the country. So again, it's going to be, there's a people angle to progressing this industry that we have to work through. In the hot sedimentary aquifer projects, I've got an example with some numbers on screen of the Pretty Hill project in the southern part of Victoria by the Victorian Geothermal Energy Company. That project is privately financed. They've got examples of decent temperatures from petroleum wells in the area. They've got decent permeability. They've got everything they need and have been working away in the background to progress that project. It's one I'm sure we'll hear more about. There's also work being done on another active hot sedimentary aquifer play in the Perth Basin. So if you want to know more, I've got QR codes on screen for a selection of documents that might be relevant where I pulled some of this data. Of course, do visit the AGA website as well. So thank you. Happy to take any questions or comments.
pause. Here we go. All right.
Love your presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I just had to laugh a little bit, I must say, about allergic reaction, because I think you're a diplomat here. No, I guess the question is, because I do see your point about the social and the people point, but from a policy point of view, is it realistic that, whether we call it sugarcoating, stimulation, whether it's actual fracking, but do you think that's going to happen? Is that going to be allowed as a social license as well, but also as a policy lever, that this is going to happen in Australia?
I think that allergic reaction had been worse in the oil and gas industry, maybe 5-10 years ago, and I think even on the hydrocarbon side, it is easing. But, it could come down to specific land holdings and individual landowners being difficult and galvanising local communities. There's plenty of examples of that in the natural gas industry, the coal seam gas industry. So, yeah, it's just one to watch. I think...
Yep.
Kiwi question.
Noel Courtright here. The permit map that you showed, does that mean that is all locked up? Or do they have to release their permits and let other people in the areas?
Yeah, there is a timeline. You can't just lock up an area of land and do nothing with it. So much like oil and gas, you have to submit a work plan, report to government along your progress with that work plan, and if you're not making progress with your work plan, then the permit, can be taken off you early. So you can't lock it up forever.
Could I add a supplement to that answer as well, is that a lot of the tan colors are actually applications, not issued permits. So there was a huge increase in the number of applications.
Yeah, but they need to turn green to get to title.
And I might be so bold as to say that is one of the roadblocks, is actually getting the permits issued. It's the states are responsible for. But there's been a lot of applications that have been sitting there for quite a while.
Yeah, I have heard anecdotes that they seem to go into the too hard pile with regulators in some states. Online question?
Martin, got a question from online? Here we go.
So we've got a question from online. The question's from Ben Adams, and he's asking, if you were given free rein to deliver a showcase project, what would you do?
Ooh, interesting. What would I do? I mean, I do find the co-produced, it may not be a view shared by others on the board, but I think my background in oil and gas means the co-produced fluid opportunity feels like low-hanging fruit. It feels like it should be easy. The volumes of fluid are huge, and then that might open up the conversation to wider use of geothermal more general. I mean, a megalitre of warm water a day is a lot.
Okay, any other questions online? Fantastic, thank you, Rosalind. That was an excellent presentation, good summary. So that was the last presentation of this first session. So Marit sort of laid out the big picture for us, and then Rebecca kind of continued to lay out the big picture and the potential for geothermal to actually contribute with some massive cost reductions if we can get the economies of scale and apply synergies that are available. And now Rosalind's sort of shown us where things, what our history of geothermal is in Australia. So let's take a break for morning tea, have a chat, and we'll come back and hear some more about the opportunities that exist here in Australia in the next session. Aim to get back here at 11:20, so just over 20 minutes. We'll try to stick to the schedule just because we have online presenters here that are probably up at uncivilized hours and we don't want to keep them waiting. So, thank you. Well, I guess you came from the coffee, so you know how to get back to it.